Forward to the cloud. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, start with a nice big breath. Rad. So my first question before we get started, Jeff, how was this whole experience for you, this particular Google Doc? What kind of complex emotions, what kind of things came up for you when you were writing this?
Interesting, great question. Interestingly nostalgic. It's like there's phantom feelings that it's very interesting to articulate that getting into another life, it's like feeling from another perspective, and there's a nostalgia to it. There's also the phantomness that I'm trying to articulate is that there's a lot that I don't know, but I feel that I know in my body, if that makes sense. So it's like there's a knowing. Mentally, though, in terms of constructing some stories, I just don't have the information there. But there's also like, yeah, it's very interesting. And particularly going into, there was a lot of trauma and a lot of instability and volatility, especially on my mother's side of the family. And as a kid, I always looked at that and there was like this insanity to it. And I always had a certain degree of, don't know how I managed it, just distance. And of course, I certainly took a lot of it on psychologically and emotionally, and that was the eating, that was the weight gain that I had, and that's how I coped. But in a more like perceiver sense, I always felt there was an insanity to my mother and my sister, especially their dynamic. And even though it's like I also didn't know any better. Like they were crazy. And I say crazy, like they had definitely their mental health and stories and all of that, and legitimate things that happened. And I didn't know any better that like they just were who they were for me. So it's very interesting in reflection to see that I did take things on emotionally, but I didn't take, from what I could gather, take on much story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. That's curious that you would have a sort of a built-in, I guess like a coping, I imagine you're able to witness it, but then you're also able to have this boundary, which is not something that always happens, especially from an early age. It would be I would imagine it'd be easy to get caught up in that, or see yourself in that, or go, start identifying it to the point that you're starting to, bring on some of those behaviors yourself. So it's interesting. It's definitely interesting.
I felt like I saw my sister get caught up into it. And I'll tell you what, I had one of my biggest first language moments, and also the emotional release associated with that, was around forgiveness, the word forgiveness, the richness of that. And it was when I was in my mid 20s, I was working at the yoga studio. I might have even said this on one of the podcasts that we did, but one of my colleagues there was asking me about my sister, and I would always be a little bit defensive about my family, because part of it was just not knowing, and the other part of it was just the complete shit show that I had yet to wade through to see a bigger picture. And she was asking about my sister, and my relationship with my sister was such that there's a great wall of China boundary between myself and my sister, because of a lot of the dysfunction that I wanted to distance myself from. And when I was expressing that, I realized that my sister experienced a lot of difficulty and adversity at a different age than me. And it was that moment that I clicked in and really got out of my own point of view and attempted to be in her point of view. That
Mm.
huge shift. And it was like, how could I judge, or how could I possibly know what she went through in order to become and adopt the stories that she did? And when I recognized that and realized that, was huge, because I was like, whoa, I felt that like a weight lifting off of me. And I was like, that's forgiveness. And I felt and I recognized that I did that as much more so for myself.
Mm.
I felt lighter and I released it. Then it was never about like harboring something over my sister.
And how did your relationship change with your sister after that?
Significantly internally. My sister and I,
Mm.
after my mother passed away when I was 22, my sister would have been right at 30 and my mom was 56. And the nature of this, of what was happening, was I took on what is the name, um basically the responsibility of sorting out the estate. Well, I forget what the name of that
Oh yeah. Executor.
executor, exactly. And because my sister wasn't fit for it, and I had to kick her out of the house and her partner at the time in order to, because I just wanted everything to be clean cut and done, and I was so ready to be over it. And
Mm.
we were out of touch. Basically, for me, it was that keeping a 1 mile distance from her, because I knew how toxic she could be and how
Mm.
manipulative she could be. So I kept my distance from her because of that. And then we fell out of touch completely. And there was about a 2.5 year period where I didn't know where she was in the world.
Wow.
And my dad didn't either.
Wow.
We had no contact with her. And my dad and I would talk like, do we need to hire a private investigator? Um, the knowing out, like, us knowing who she was and what she was capable of did not rule out the fact that she had died, or like there was something significant that had happened. Of course, I didn't feel it in me that she was dead. However, we were like really at a loss. And then um, after that period, we got back in touch. Very interestingly, right around a retreat I did with my friend Matthew. We were co-facilitating this retreat. Matthew's a shaman, amazing human being, and we were doing a lot of ancestral work at that retreat. And it was
Mm.
right around then that I got in touch with my sister again. She sent me a message, I believe.
Cool.
And she had done a ton of healing and coming out of her addictions, from narcotics and prescription medicines. And now we have a really nice relationship. I mean, I wish we talked more. We send messages to each other. Um, and we're there for each other. Like, I really do feel that. And she's come to visit my dad and I, and her daughter, my niece, and her partner have come to visit, and it's all been quite harmonious. And it's like, wow, I see my mother's likeness so much in my sister, which is
Mm.
spooky, because I really lost touch. Well, my mother passed away, and then I lost touch with my sister. My sister has so much of my mother in her,
Mm.
of
Yeah.
our mother in her. And so there's this eeriness, like, wow. And it's so departed from that. This is the phantom energy. It's like it was another life.
Mm.
That's the phantom energy. For me, it's like tapping into another life that
Yeah.
is, there's an eerie doesn't quite capture it, because it's not a negative connotation. It's just like a very uh
Like,
peculiar.
yeah, peculiar, like almost like supernatural to a degree, right? Which can,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, eerie. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just
That's cool.
like I described how there was that distance, I never fully felt a part of the family. And it wasn't for not being loved and supported. It wasn't like I didn't feel a part of the family in that sense. It's because I wasn't a part of the drama in a sense. I never contributed to the
Mm.
drama I always steered clear of it, and I numbed out from it. I avoided that.
I was going to ask you, yeah, was it like an avoidant
Yeah,
behavior,
totally
but
avoidant.
for your own self preservation by the sound of it?
Isolation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that. So there's definitely a peculiar phantom energy, like as if it were another life. And in a sense, it really was, but it's so interesting. It's nostalgic even. And that was the kind of the feelings of going through the Google, the Google
Yeah.
Doc, because my mother's side of the my mother and my father divorced when I was 3, and it feels good to talk about this, by the way.
Good.
And I went to live with my mother and my sister. And so I spent the majority, I would go visit my dad every other weekend. Those were the terms of the divorce and the custody. So I spent very little amount of time with my dad. And when I would go with my dad, it felt like complete freedom. And when I was with my mother, it would feel often overbearing, overwhelming. Um, and there would be an intensity to it. And that whole side of the family, like literally disintegrated, just
Mm.
disintegrated. Like there's definitely some substantial it just I just it's like like disintegrated is the word. My grandfather, my mother's father, committed suicide. I know that there were some family friends from the town they grew up in that I met once. My uncle eventually committed suicide. I There was no family reunions on that side of the family. I did have family reunions on my dad's side of the family, on his mother's side. So it's like my connection with my mother's side of the family is it's like that. Wow, it's just descent like poof. It's very interesting.
That is interesting.
And
When you say, sorry,
hmm?
go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
never grew up feeling like I was part of a bigger family than the smaller nuclear. Like my grandmother was a big part of growing up. My mother, my sister, big part of growing up. So it was very maternal. And then my uncle played a reasonable role in from the time I was 7 or so until 16. And that was that. And it's like when they were gone, they were gone. There was nobody else on that side. And at least on
Wow.
my dad's side, there's a little bit more connection.
So I imagine there's a couple things that came up. I just wanted to ask you about the. It feels, and I can relate with the being a child of divorced parents, but for you especially to be such a youngster when it happened, it feels like very much. I imagine you had two different lives. Like you were living two different lives. When you're with your dad, you're like you say, there's this freedom, and then when you're with your mom, there's like this necessary, you know, avoidance that you're putting up, and it's like you have two different sides to your personality from a very early age. Did you view it like that, or was there enough of like the true, were you secure with yourself enough to be able to uh, have essentially two different identities but still be true to little Jeff?
Really cool question. Interesting question. I would say that the traits that I experienced the most when I would be with on my mother's side, which I noticed, it's also the most unconscious. Like it was the most unconscious, and it's
Mm.
been a part of my healing process for years. There was a lot of anxiety in me, a lot
Yeah.
of like a sense of tiptoeing, and there was like my mother she had to also be the father in that sense. So she imposed the
Okay.
structure, the discipline, in a sense. Um, the pressure upon me to be in her image was there, to be a good boy, to be um, good in school. I certainly felt that. And so I also felt this ickiness. I never liked school that much from a young age. Um, so I felt a lot of this pressure when I was with my mother, and that would just be, it was so freedom to go with my dad. And I would
Mm,
remember feeling when I would come back to my mother's house on Sundays with my dad, I would feel like this feeling torn of like, I don't want this to end and I don't want to go back to that. And it was like this deep gut feeling of, it could have been grief, it could have been anxiety, whatever it
mm,
was. But I remember feeling that almost every time on Sunday, going
hmm.
back to my mother's house, going back to my life.
Yeah,
Uh,
right.
and with dad, it wasn't like it didn't, I can't say I perceive it as a different identity. It was just more freedom, more space, less constriction. And my dad would take me to do the things I wanted to do. Um, we would hang out together. He really, and this is a real testament to my dad, is a good part of the time that we had together, he really intended to make the most out of that. Now, that's not to say that it was um, always groovy, because I remember when I was about 3 or 4, my dad spanked me really, like it was a significant beating. It wasn't like,
Mm,
I remember it. So it wasn't unconscious because I remember it. And that's a very significant thing, that
right.
I remember being a little shit and I pissed my dad off. And I know that he has a temper, and we were traveling. We went to the Alabama Space Center or something like that. And he took me up to the room and he spanked, and he punished me physically, but I never, it was almost like I didn't want to tell and this is very interesting to remember, but it's like my mother's reaction to that was more emotionally um, dense and uncomfortable than the actual event itself, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. Because my
It
mother
does. Yeah.
would punish my dad. She took him to court. She made his life hell, and I never felt resentful towards my dad. So it was
Hmm.
like my mother, she had her um I've worked with a psychotherapist, and we've sussed out that she had significant traits of narcissistic tendencies, and she could be very manipulative, and she would often try to weaponize um me against my dad against me in a manipulative way. And I
Hmm.
never felt like that only pushed me more towards wanting to be with him in a sense. So yeah, like time with my dad was way more and then I would really be sad to leave him.
Yeah, which just sort of adds to, yeah, that's a challenge. It's just that you're already growing up, you're finding your way, and then you throw that in there too. It's very challenging. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks for listening, buddy.
For sure, dude. Yeah, no, this stuff's really important. It's just so fascinating. I love your take on it. The like the phantomness you put. I just kind of put it at the top there. Some of the words we're using, peculiar. It's super cool. I really like this. And yeah, like dude, some really profound, tragic, traumatic events happening. To your point, especially on your mom's side there. Uh, is there any story or any person or personality that you'd like to start with, and do we can do some four stepping and things of that nature? Is there anything that stands out to you right away? It sounds like you've done a lot of work with your mom, which is great over the years. Sorry, I noticed your mom was 36. You were 20. Getting the ages right here. Your mom was 36 when she passed.
I think she was 56. I was 22.
56. So you were 22. She was
Hold on.
56.
She was born in 56 and died in 2012. So yeah, I think she was 56.
56. And sorry, your sister is yours. So she would have been, you were 22. She was
Around 30.
30. Okay.
7.5 years older than me.
So that's a different dynamic to you, quite an age gap. So when you're, and when you're seeing such a, different behavior, the way that she presents herself compared to you is, yeah, that adds to it, I'm sure.
And in terms of four-stepping,
Yeah, is there anything that you'd want to four step? Because if you want to just like, we could do some reading, we can just help, air these out with a read, whatever you'd like, my friend.
let's do that. And if there's anything with any if there's any sense that there's a
Like a
pull there,
charge or
charge.
pull.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
word. That's the word, charge. Then I would like to four-step it.
Sounds good. But until then, yeah, absolutely. What's better than reading it out and just airing it out, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful.
I'll start from the top, my mother's childhood.
Yeah, let's do it. Sounds great.
Okay. My mother, Catherine Madra, she left this plane when I was 22 years old. I've approached healing around my mother significantly in the past 3 or 4 years. My mother had a challenging childhood, from what I gather. She was the black sheep of the family. I remember her saying that she was supposed to be a boy in her father's eyes, meaning that my father had hoped, or her father had hoped she'd be a boy. And I suspect this one got me. I suspect she was never truly celebrated for being,
Mm,
or she at least never felt
felt
that.
that way. Yeah.
And that's the black sheep kind of experience, the odd one out.
Sure.
I remember my mother would share good times. They lived in a beautiful country house in Cairo, Illinois. And there was room to play. I'm wishing if I knew more about my mother's childhood friends and things they would do. And I know that she was a bit of a tomboy. I'm getting off script.
All good.
There was significant events related to her relationship with her brother, my uncle, and he bullied her from her. This is coming from her. And I also believe his friends bullied her. And I think there was an event, and I've had a healing session on an ancestral type of healing around this, where I was at a retreat. I was at in this opportunity for this one-to-one session was offered. And it was like very surprising that this came up. And it was the memory of my mother telling me, and I remembered it vaguely because it didn't really land on me as a child, but or I'm pretty sure I was either not quite a teen, maybe early teens or younger when I learned of this. And to my mother's credit, she never kept the dirty laundry. She would always talk about it. And I think that's better, although she was very victim centric. But there was this experience, and this is how I remember it being heard, or how I visualize is my uncle, my mother's brother, watched as, or stood by, was a better way of framing it, as his friends molested or raped my mother at a young age. And that's what I remember. And I need to talk to my sister more about this because she had a better connection with these family stories. Like I said, I perceive that as drama. I never, um, I have a different view of something that is so significant now and how that affects my mother and me. But I never wanted to, get into that. There was like a quality to that experience that I wanted to avoid. So I was avoidant to that story and to hearing that. So I'm sure there's plenty, um, these things that kind of pop back into memory. It's like, oh, right, I remember being told about that. Like my mother's miscarriages, her abusive experience with her first husband, and also being, I think, another time she was raped, or I'm not entirely sure. So I know that I know that she was raped. I know that's come up. Um, and here's the thing that I'm really, in a sense, mourning or grieving. It's like really on behalf of my mother. Is I feel like and I embody this too. It's very interesting. She was never fully taken seriously.
Mm.
So that's very interesting to me. Is I It was kind of like the boy who cried wolf,
Mm.
how there's so much drama in somebody's life that when they're talking about it, and they're very victim also, victim centric around it, that you just start to tune it out.
Mm.
And I really feel for my mother in terms of that and I was young. I mean, to be honest, I was young and I didn't know a lot of what this entailed or implied, or nor was I emotionally equipped to digest such information. And at the same time, I feel like my mother was never really heard, and that's something that she
Mm.
really missed in her life, especially as I knew her, is that being truly heard. I mean, she had psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors. Her doctors a lot of times diagnosed her as hypo. So I remember one significant doctor diagnosed her as hypochondriac, and that's because she did have diseases, but that's her not being heard. She was, when somebody is truly ill and they're called a hypochondriac, um, for me, that's like the penultimate, most significant way of not being heard. It's like, I'm here, I'm sick, there's something wrong with me. Hear me, really do the test, really find out, and then to be just called a hypochondriac. And I feel like that was a theme that my mother attracted somehow into her life, um, to really not be heard. So I'm very interested around that. And all of this that's coming up right now is just new insight, new points of view. So
When you're let's check in with your body when you're coming up with this, and that's great, like doing some great work with that, this acknowledgement. How does that showing up in your body? Is there any tingling? Is there anything that your body is also telling you? Yeah, check in with that.
there's a mild uh, sadness, and
Mm.
there's a sense of empathy, like an emotional
Mm.
bearing, and really appreciating, in terms of feeling more of the gravity. And what does that feel like? That feels connected I feel more
Mm.
connected with my mother, and it's like she's feeling heard in a sense.
Yeah,
I'm giving that.
beautiful.
Wow. So there's now a lightness that's coming with this.
Beautiful, beautiful. You know, I have one affirmation. I don't know if you want to try it right now or if we can do it at the end of her story, but even just saying like I hear my mother or I understand my mother, saying a form of that that resonates with you and just saying that out loud with a nice big breath.
Yeah, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna write it too.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Like you
I
say this,
you,
yeah.
Mom.
I'm saying like the dismissive nature of, you know, being, yeah, a hypochondriac, or like you say,
Yeah,
it really,
dismiss it. And when I was, it's interesting because when I was unraveling that piece, I was quick to acknowledge that I was young and had very little emotional fidelity to be able to take that on. But it was because I felt a tinge of guilt. So there's also guilt that I was quick um to bring that up, because it doesn't feel like it's my guilt, but there's guilt there, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
okay. That does make sense. Yes. No, really great awareness, you know, on your part to be able to articulate that too, right? That's 'cause that's very complex. Any of this
Yeah.
stuff is there's like a whole extra layer, you know, with when you're
Oh,
like you say, put yourself in other people's bodies. Yeah, do well. Let's what resonated with you? What did you write down? I'm curious for that affirmation. I
I hear you, Mama. That's what
nice.
that's how I would look at her, and I feel emotional right now of just
Yeah,
saying that, and it just feels so so needed. I hear you, Mama. I hear you, Mom.
beautiful.
She always insisted I call her Mommy until I was a teenager, and it was very uncool to call her Mommy. And then
Yeah,
it became Mama. So I want to try also Mommy.
yeah, do it.
I hear you, Mommy. I hear you. I hear you. I understand you, Mommy. I accept you, Mommy. And when it comes to release, that's going to be one of the things. I did that. I practiced that myself, releasing that some of those events. So
That's great. Yes.
another,
Awesome.
yeah.
Great work. Great work so far. Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, I feel lighter.
Good.
I feel,
Good.
yeah.
When you say lighter, like, is it, you know, is it something it's like, is it weight,
It's
like that typical weight off your shoulders, off your
yeah,
chest? Like, yeah.
really my chest and my shoulders. And it's very interesting because it's like I feel like I ate a big meal a couple of hours ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like that's preceding anything in my feeling in my lower bodies, like that, the lower chakras, lower energy,
Yeah.
like feeling into my gut also. But it's like I want to feel there as well. So it's also, there's a superficiality to it, and there's a desire to go deeper. I guess we could say
Nice.
there's a bit of numbness as well.
Okay. Interesting. Like, then that's where, yes, the desire to go further.
Yeah.
Beautiful, man. That's great. Great job.
I did that healing session, and it came to my memory, and I knew that that's what I had to work with, was the event that my um, mother was abused either sexually or molested in some capacity. And my uncle, her brother, was a bystander, not doing anything about it, and it was his friend or something to that effect.
Yeah, yeah.
And I brought that up in that healing session, and uh Julie, she was the channel for that, brought in the entities of my mother, uncle, grandfather, also the my mother's father. And there was something that couldn't be resolved, and that it was very healing to bring that up, and also there, I had a significant release there, but there was something that could not be resolved between my mother and my uncle. Like there was
Mm,
some damage or something that even as spirits or in this container that we created together, they Julie said that there just wasn't going to be any progress there today. Like there was something.
mm.
So
Still a
that was,
block.
yeah, and that was 4 years ago, um in August. So about 3.5 years ago. So damn, no, 2017,
So
August,
almost five.
four and a
Yeah,
half
about
years
five
ago.
or 4.5. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I the way I've worked, and I've done most of my healing work with regards to my mother's side, because I spent so much time with her and in her field. And I've recognized personal patterns and stories and wounding more relative to my mother than my father. So I've done a lot more work on that side.
Mm. Hmm.
Um, so yeah, so that's interesting. Here's some other, I'll keep reading some other significant events that I worked on
Yeah.
releasing.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, there was, her adolescence and young adulthood was also a mixture of being sensitive. So like, I think she was very sensitive, um, and also quite suppressed, and cast as the black sheep. When she was 17, her father, my grandfather, Thomas was his name,
Mm.
committed suicide. And I talked with my sister about this last summer. I asked to understand more. And there was a rumor that my mother had some kind of uh, either sex or relationship, or maybe even was raped. I don't know, but by a black man. And so there was like this, there was also a undercurrent of racism around it. And so this is what my sister said, and I'm not fully sure, obviously. But anyway, there was this rumor that my grandfather, my mother's father, heard. And the story goes, as I remember, is my mother came home, she was 17. There was this rumor that her father caught wind of. She went to dinner, said she wasn't feeling well. Could she go to her room? He lost it. He lost his mind in that moment, and chased her upstairs or something like that, and eventually grabbed a gun, went into the bathroom, slammed the door, locked himself in, and killed himself. And my mother was on the other side of that door, and I'm thinking, like, what a fucking intense experience, like horrific
Yeah.
experience.
Wow.
So she was 17. She wasn't a child when that happened, but it uh really horrendous experience nonetheless. And that like suicide has been a very interesting theme. um my uncle, my mother's brother, ended up committing suicide. So Thomas, grandfather, his son Andy, my uncle, committed suicide also. And then my sister married her first husband, committed suicide. So there's been a like a theme of suicides on that male, really with regards to my mother's side, just trickling down. And I've been very mentally um on the lookout for that kind of thinking or that kind of mentality that, if I ever consider taking my life, or if I ever get into a place, that I would be very vigilant to that, very hyper alert, and not particularly hyper alert, but just paying attention, because I know it runs in the family.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Um, and yeah, so I talked about my mother being diagnosed as a hypochondriac, but she did have real diseases, lupus, narcolepsy, that she was diagnosed with. And I've told you before, my mother's illnesses, I'm certain they are manifestations of unresolved
Mm,
trauma. I'm certain
right.
of it. And she had a heavy, heavy victim mentality, very deeply entrenched in her victim mentality, from all the way from being the black sheep, um, to being diagnosed as a hypochondriac. It's like she attracted a lot of that in her life. And I say that very consciously. I say that because I understand how it works, that she attracted that into her life one way or the other, by seeing it that way and having that story. So that was very formational for me. But like, there was something in me that, like, almost like I was allergic to that, to the drama. But especially as it played out between my mother and my sister, I was allergic to it. I just wanted to get out of there.
Yeah. That's fascinating that you say that, that word allergic, very just like, yes. Yeah, that gives a real good, strong visual, like for me, for picturing your guys' family dynamic. Allergic, just really staying clear, but avoidant, like you, to your point, is it's
Avoidant.
an avoidant
Yeah,
coping mechanism, right? Which, I mean, yeah, that's yeah,
absolutely.
fascinating.
When I was a little boy, I had um I was very spiritually into, like, I had imaginary friends. I definitely connected with spirit, with more mystical, fantastical experiences. So it's just, there's also that phantomness in that, like, wow, really remembering that. Um,
When you had
okay.
your imaginary friends, like, do you, looking back on it, or have you given any extra thought to it? Do you believe that could be potentially some, some ancestral, characters visiting you, or was it
Ooh,
more so 100% imagination based, or maybe a mix of both? Have you given it much thought as far as that goes?
super cool question. No, I haven't given it much thought, to be honest.
Hmm.
I remember specifically having Speedy Gonzalez, who's a cartoon character, was an
Yes.
imaginary friend. Um, and I talked to him, and I think I had other imaginary friends too that I talked to.
Cool.
Um, I'm not sure if I have any sense of it being an ancestor, but that's a fantastic inquiry.
Yeah, it's curious, right? It's just,
Yeah.
wonder how much of that would have, yeah, especially if you're like I imagine the way you're saying that you're very in, you were from an early age just in tune, you were open to it, you were an open channel essentially for that. So,
Yeah.
you know, you know, yeah, interesting. Anyways,
My
interesting.
my mother, so of my mother's two grandmothers, she was really close. I think she was really close to one, and the other was very nasty to her. So I think
Mm,
she got her deepest love, familial support by my, I forget which of her grandmothers. So it would have been my great great, but I think there was one that she was close with and one that she wasn't.
mm,
I'm getting a memory right now of one of my earliest memories of a relative dying. Aunt Sam died of cancer, and I was just a very little boy, and we went to visit her, in the she was in the hospital bed. And I remember it's opening up, like, there was a sense of family. I wonder what happened. There was family, friends, and it's all very interesting because it seemed like it started disintegrating before I was before, definitely before my teenage years, that we lost touch with them. Super interesting.
And
I,
what was
huh?
your perception of like a death in the family? Like because that's always an impactful, like when you have this first like taste of mortality, or the fact that, it's I'm always interested by that. What was your reaction to that first close family member death?
Okay, so I want to put this in three stages. There was the time that I was before my parent, I think it was before my parents divorced, or right around that. I was with my dad, and I was just talking, and I was the most talkative little boy, and I was saying something to the effect of, and we'll live forever and ever and ever. And my dad apparently got the cue that's like, it's time to tell him that we die, that that death is
Mm,
a thing.
yeah,
And so and I must have been between 2 and 4. um and it was real. Like, I felt it, and I felt really sad and really
mm,
disturbed by the idea that we would die. But it was a very significant event because it landed. Like, the conversation landed.
mm,
I I I got that this isn't that, my dad's gonna die one day. I'm gonna
right.
die one day. And
Wow.
it was more so my dad's gonna die one day. I wasn't thinking so much of myself then, but it was really like, whoa. So that was a legitimate moment, that I remember, like, that we were in the bedroom on the bed, and um dad just said it. Dad just told me, are we, I don't know, I feel like we were playing around, or I was playing, and I was saying we were going to live forever. And it was very sobering. That's what I remember, because it was instantly
Right.
sobering.
Wow.
So with Aunt Sam, and it was like this mythical person. Again, it's like that not feeling connected. Like I said before, it was like hearing about family, but not knowing family. So
Right.
I remember hearing a lot of stories about family members, my grandfather, um, Aunt Sam, but I think that when my grandmother moved to Georgia, she estranged herself from a lot of family, in a sense. So they were like there was this mythical, like, this kind of disconnection between them. I'm not sure mythical is the word, but just not knowing them so well. So it was like, okay, going to visit Aunt Sam. Who's this? She's dying. Okay, she's going to die now. And then Aunt Sam died, and just feeling that through the family. I feel
Mm,
like I felt it more now that I'm reflecting on it. And dude, it's crazy talking about this, because these are things I haven't thought about in decades.
right.
Um, I believe I remember feeling that more through the family than for myself,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I wasn't so connected with her, and it was an oddity. It was this ethereal experience. I wonder if that wasn't around the time that I started having an imaginary. There's something there. There's something interesting there.
Hmm. Definitely.
My uncle's death, I was 16. That was the most significant um, death in terms of disruption in my life. I'm trying to think. Suicide was my mother would, so like I said, she's highly manipulative, in a sense that she would threaten to commit suicide as a tool of manipulation.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow, like, yeah, it doesn't get any deeper than
Yeah.
that for me.
No, man.
Um and maybe that was from her. I guess if somebody kills themselves in your life, then you feel like that, and you see the damage that that can do, then you can see the kind of emotional leverage that you can get on others. So
Sure.
I don't know. But my uncle did commit suicide, and it was a surprise. There was a lot of drug abuse. My mother had prescription narcotics. because of her illnesses and cancer. She had prescription pain medicine, and my mother would manipulate. Let me back up. So interestingly enough, my family home, where my grandfather committed suicide, where my mother and uncle grew up, and grandmother, burned down. And I'm pretty sure it was around after granddad committed suicide. And then my grandmother, mom, we called her mom, she moved to Georgia, and that became her place. And that was, by the way, that was the safest place I ever felt growing up. Mom's
Oh,
house. Mom's
gotcha.
house. Remember
Yeah.
doing some shamanic journeying with Matthew, who I mentioned before, and it was like, what's the safe place? And it was mom's house.
Cool.
So, and then my uncle, who's a couple of years older than my mother, his apartment burned down, and
Hmm.
he came to live with my grandmother. So he lived in mom's house, and he was in
Gotcha.
a very depressive state for several, I would say, time was very different when I was that age, but it felt like at least a couple of years where we
Mm.
would barely ever see him. He would be in his room asleep. So he was in a
Okay.
depressive state.
Yeah.
And he came out of that funk when I was like 8 or 9, or maybe a little bit older, 10 or 11. They got a dog. He got some animals. He had some life, but he never really reintegrated back into society after
Mm.
apartment burned down. He went through a nasty divorce. He was just toast. And another interesting impact that I can reflect on is my grandfather, when he died, he left a considerable amount of money. And it's like I saw that my mother and my uncle both became dependent on that money, and my grandmother
Mm.
kept them close with that money. I'm not sure to what degree, but they never really self actualized in terms of making something.
Right.
Um, and so my uncle came out of that depression, and but something interesting happened, and I don't really know the dynamics of this, but my mother started um essentially baiting him, or I wouldn't know the right term, but she would give him pain medicine so he could get high,
Mm.
and he
Okay.
became subservient to her. So
Wow. Hmm.
so she would do that, and my uncle actually came into my life in a much more considerable way. But this is all setting up to explain how I feel about drugs, pharmaceutical medicine, everything, just how nasty it all is. And my mother would, like, it was just very toxic. She would accuse my uncle of stealing, and maybe he did, maybe he didn't, her pain medicine, etc. But eventually she cut him off, and he went to the drink. He went to alcohol, and
Mm.
like viciously alcohol. And there was like for a period of a few months where he went in and out of rehab centers because he had nearly alcohol poisoning. Um, and then like a short time after that, and this is after years of getting closer to him, he became the father, sort of a father figure on that side, because remember, I was spending less time with my dad, more time over at my mother's house. And he just out of the blue, he took his life. We had spent the day with grandma. We took her shopping. She was in early stages of dementia, very early. um, we dropped her off. My mother and I started heading back home. We were one exit away, and we get a call. My mother got a call from grandma, saying it's something about Andy. I can't believe he's done this. I can't believe that he's shot himself, and or something to that effect. And we turned around at the exit and came right back. And I remember stopping, and my mother went, his bedroom door was right past the garage door on the left. So basically you step inside the house and you look to the left, you can see in the room. And my mother stepped across and looked over and said, "What have you done, Andy? What have you done?" And I had to, like, at that stage, I felt like I had to um also see, even though I was told not to, and I
Mm,
saw, like, I just crossed the threshold enough so I could see that he had blown his brains out, quite literally. Um, and that, I'm glad I can. I had to say that just then. I had to talk all the way through that to see if there was any charge in it.
hmm
Just now, and I'm really pleased to say that it's quite smooth. But that was fucking intense and
Of course,
significant and
yeah.
shocking. And I was 16, and I didn't quite know how to reconcile, but I had the support with my dad was very supportive. I was encouraged to, to cry, to, like, that. I had, even they, I had notes for school, but I already had adopted this sense of I needed to get over it quick, or
Hmm.
I couldn't let that. I felt, here's what it was. I felt guilty using that as an excuse in school, like to take a day off or 2 days off or not have to do a project or something like that.
Interesting.
I
Yeah.
felt this guilt, and I don't know where that guilt came from. I think it was around how I was conditioned to be in school and that there could be no excuses, etc. But
Sure.
that death, and then I've had so this is all answering your question around how has death influenced me, and I've seen a significant amount of death that um it's always it can be painful depending on how attached we are to that person, but it's now something that I feel quite integrated with as a process, as like, as a, this is what happens to us, and it's not like I live in fear of that. um so yeah, quite a lot of death, quite a lot of suicide running down the line, mental health.
Yeah. Big time. Yeah.
um Quickly, because I know we're properly going for it. Let's Do you mind if how are you on time?
Yeah, we can go till whenever, man. I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, whatever you need.
Thank you for listening around my mother
Of
side.
course, man.
I
Thanks for
want to
sharing.
yeah, thank you. I want to go through my dad's,
Yeah, absolutely.
who I feel, even though my dad and I are closer, we've lived together the most, I feel like we also, like, my dad is not one to talk about the skeletons in the closet, so to speak.
Hmm. So
Um,
very different than your mom's side, where your mom, like
yeah,
you said, airs out that dirty laundry. Your dad, not as
yeah,
much.
that dad not as much.
Hmm.
Um,
Interesting.
yeah, but he has had some, and then there, and so I've approached talking with him before, and he's like, he's like, you don't want to know, or do you really want to know, or
Yeah.
he has that perspective of it, so that's very interesting to me. Let me read out dad. So my dad,
Yeah.
Jeff Lester, who I'm named after, had a more free childhood. He was the middle child, had a younger brother, Greg, older brother, Bobby. Stories of my dad that I remember include childhood freedom, playing go-kart. Like, they lived in a time where this city was quite very rural. So they, um, my dad was like a bit of a hellraiser. In fact, he often makes the comment that, like, how in the world did I turn out the way I am, because I gave my parents no drama, in terms of behavior, in terms of getting into trouble and getting up to no good. But my dad's like, it's like more very boyish, classically or stereotypically boyish shenanigans, so to speak. Like, um yeah, shenanigans is the word that comes to mind.
I like it.
um I think my dad was really the cool guy. He was really popular, and there was a circle of kids, and my dad had a sense of charisma that drew people to him. Um, his parents divorced when he was a kid, my grandparents.
Hmm.
and I believe that they were somewhat negligent in the sense of freedom, in the sense of how he kind of raised himself in many ways, or was there's that sense that and this is something I would inquire more into. What was his relationship with his mother? I remember hearing that she was an alcoholic,
Mm.
although I don't know.
Mhm.
And then also I remember that his father, I don't know the reason for them divorcing, but I know that something my dad felt very uncomfortable about was he told me that his father told him about an affair he had with the neighbor. And
Hmm.
my granddad, when he told my dad, said it very casually. And that really left an impression on my dad, as he told me that he didn't like to hear that his dad, my granddad, was cheating on his mother, my grandmother. So that was
Right.
very interesting.
Sure.
So that was very
Hmm.
interesting. So that's some of the dirty laundry. Um,
But
my
like you
dad,
say, a little more protected, right? Definitely.
yeah,
Some of
my
these stories
dad's
very much. Yeah.
yeah, he's much more protected. Um, so I think my dad was also chasing girls a lot. He was getting after it. He
Yeah.
never yeah, he never finished high school. Definitely a rebel in that sense. But I never think that I can never imagine that him not finishing high school. I don't think he ever really had a chip on his shoulder with that. He was very entrepreneurial, very much like getting started, going to work, um, hands-on kind of person. Um, I believe that I was the first person on with regards to that side of the family to graduate college, which made my dad immensely proud, that he's still
Hmm.
quite proud of. He has always encouraged me to think big, and he always encouraged me when I was younger to think big, like think in terms of the whole world. So fascinating that that was his language, and to stay in
That's
school
cool.
because he was going to be damned if I ended up in the moving business, which he owns a moving company, and he started that in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. Um, so he met my mother after his first marriage. He split up from his first marriage because he didn't want to have kids. Ironically, he married my mother, who already had my sister, and they ended up having me. So he pivoted on that. Um, my dad now, and for a long time, he has a reputation, and I see this more than a spoken reputation, but people gravitate towards him because he's a listener. He's quite
Mm.
grounded. Um, Very reliable, very stable personality. He's classic Taurus. Um, he can also have a quick temper for those closest to him. He can be easily agitated, fettered. He also has a considerable victim mentality in a sense that he definitely, he counts his blessings and he complains a lot. So he complains too. But
Right.
he's always willing to do the good deed, but he always laments when he has to go the extra mile to do something for somebody.
Mm.
Like
Mhm.
he's like, when you start doing something kind and then all of a sudden it becomes a pain in the ass. It's like that happens to my dad every time.
Mm. Gotcha. Yep. Yep.
We certainly hear about it when it happens.
Yeah.
Um, he can be impatient. And then just honestly, my dad's just something about him. He's my hero. He's been stable and supportive throughout my life. He's always encouraged my freedom and applauded my endeavors quite sincerely, quite sincerely. So I really see how proud I make him, and I can feel, he wells up, and it's like, wow, I feel that.
That's cool, man. That's great. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
All right, dude. I want to, for sake of time, because um, I need to get going soon. Can we go into
Yeah. The release
the
statements.
statements? Yeah,
Yeah. Absolutely. Let's do some of those.
let's do it. I release my mother's um, grief of not being heard. I'm going to change that to pain
Yeah.
of not being heard, of not being seen, of not being validated for who she was. I'm going to, okay, anger around her anger from her mistreatment and abuses, her grief and any guilt around her father's suicide. That's it. The first one
Those
is
are
the big
heavy.
one.
Yeah, those are heavy duty, man. Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm not fucking around.
Yeah.
I released my mother's I release my mother's pain from not being heard. I release my mother's pain from not being seen. I release my mom's pain from not being validated for who she was. I release my mom's victim mentality.
Mm.
I release my mom's anger from being abused sexually, physically, and emotionally. I release my mom's grief and guilt, any grief and guilt held from her father's suicide.
Nice work. How does that feel?
I felt the most when I spontaneously decided to release the victim mentality.
Yes.
I also felt the most for not being validated for who she was.
Mm.
And yeah, I really feel that. And when I did this before, like maybe 2 weeks, a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, I just sat with myself and did it. And that I felt a lot more in that. And I think that because I did that, I released and moved a lot in that experience that made this feel lighter or more
Yes.
like less substantial. But I
Hmm.
did
Hmm.
feel the most when I let go, when the victim mentality came up, because I know that I perceive a lot of negative experience on my mother's side, and I'm sure there was a lot more good there too.
Mm.
That I'm only more aware of the negative. So I wanted to release the victim mentality as well.
Good call, man. Good catch on that. And just to naturally have that intuition to go there for that, you know, dual purpose, really, right? To not only release, but to then shed some light on the other side of things. So brilliant. Nice work, man.
Thank you.
Feelings in your body when you scan. I noticed you were holding your heart, putting your hand over your heart. Is what kind of physicality was involved with that with those releases?
I wanted to slow down and really connect. So I felt it in my heart. I felt like I said, connected the experience. Another way of saying that is sincere in my words, like my words were landing.
Nice.
I felt genuine, like compassion, a sense of compassion when I release not being validated for who she was, like a sense of like a genuine love and appreciation for my mother for who she was. And when I release the negation of it, I feel the affirmation of it, if that makes sense.
It does. Completely.
So
That's beautiful, man.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that was
Nice
good.
work.
Thank you, dude.
Awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much for just being so open. It's like that's a, when you get into this kind of stuff, that's that's some heavy duty stuff, to go through. And I feel just honored and privileged that, we, our paths were able to cross on this again. It's like, it's so cool. So thank you for being so open about it, man. I really appreciate it. And great work, dude. Awesome work on it.
I love you, Matt.
Love you too,
It's so
dude.
cool that for if anybody from the training watches this, Matt and I have been on Zoom for, I would say, close to 12 hours.
Yep.
We've done podcasts together. So this is so
Yep.
familiar, and I'm happy that we got connected because I'm like, this is like,
Yeah,
hit the
it was
ground.
absolutely, man. It was perfect. Dude, thank you so much again. I enjoy the rest of your day. It looks like you got a good day shaping up. I like your surroundings there. I felt a good vibe from your cottage there. So
Thank you. Thank you.
man. And we'll talk to you soon, eh?
Have a great day, bro.
Yeah,
See you
same
in
to you,
the
man.
fall. Bye.
Yeah, you betcha. Bye-bye.